How's it going, everyone? Nick Templin here from Templin Scouting, and I'm back again with another video. I know it's been about a week since I last uploaded, and for those of you who know me in real life, you know the reason why. It's because I just got a new dog, and it's been taking up a lot of my time, kind of getting him trained and getting him accustomed to his new home. But after last night's draft lottery, I am excited to get back into another mock draft video. This time we'll be doing it on capfriendly.com. They have their own mock draft simulator here that you can check out if you would like to do one as well. For the purpose of this one, we will just be doing round one. In the future, I will try and do a full mock draft in separate videos, starting with round 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 7, because I do know a fair amount of the prospects in this year's draft. I will have to do a bit more research on some of the guys near the tail end. I usually know them a bit better, but this year it's been harder to watch some of those guys. But I will definitely try and do my best. So if you want to see the full mock draft at some point in the future, once the full draft order after the playoffs is decided, please give me some comments down below, like the video, so I know that that's something that you guys want to see. Alright, so starting into our updated mock draft here with the official rankings for all the non-playoff teams. So we will start with the Buffalo Sabres, and for a lot of people, Owen Power seems to be the consensus pick. I think he's an awesome player. 6'6", is a bit generous, what they're listing him at here. I think he's closer to 6'5", but obviously he's a big puck-moving defenseman, lefty, definitely something that a lot of teams are interested in, definitely something I could see Buffalo doing. But personally, I think with the possibility of potentially losing Jack Eichel, you want to potentially get somebody who can fill that spot. And in my opinion, the guy with the most upside out of all the centers in this draft is William Eklund. He's been very productive in Sweden, and he has kind of a similar skill set to Jack Eichel, where he can definitely score goals, and he's also really proficient in passing. And he's kind of a north-south player as well. He's got a lot of potential if you give him the right goal-scoring wingers. Like if they're able to hold on to Reinhart, which I'm hoping they will be for Buffalo's sake, and same with Olofsson. He can slot in right there. Maybe not right away, but definitely eventually will be a potential successor to Jack Eichel. So moving on to Seattle, who was the lucky team to move up from the third odds up to the second overall pick, and they are getting to make the first draft selection in their team's franchise history. They need a player to build their franchise around. Owen Power is the perfect guy to do that. He'll be ready to go right away. He'll be a contributor in year one. Probably as a second pairing defenseman, depending on how their expansion draft goes. But overall, this is a pretty easy selection for them to make because they don't have a roster yet. They will at the time of the draft, but for my purposes, before the expansion draft has happened, Seattle just wants to take the best player available, and that's going to be Owen Power. So moving on to the third overall pick, there's a few things that Anaheim can do with this pick. Potentially they could go defense. They just got Jamie Drysdale last season, and he is a right-handed defenseman. So if I believe he's a right-handed defenseman. People will let me know down in the comments if I'm wrong about that. But if they wanted to get his future partner, and if they wanted to get themselves into a situation where they could trade Cam Fowler and Hampus Lindholm for assets, they go out, get a left-handed defenseman, bang, they got their next, top pairing of the future. And for me, when I look at the left-handed defenseman here, it's either Edmonton or Luke Hughes. I'm a much bigger fan of Luke Hughes. I'm going to go with him as the third overall pick. Now, he's a guy that I could definitely see slide. He dealt with injury this year. Did not help him, but he's a very productive player. He's a lot like his brothers. I wouldn't say that he has the offensive upside of Quinn, but I would say he probably has a bit more defense to his game, and overall, I think that I could see a pairing of Hughes and Drysdale being really good for the Ducks in the future. In my last mock draft, I actually had them taking Dylan Gunther there. Personally, I could still see them doing that. I think that would be a really good pick for them, but I think right now, they have decent enough forward prospects that they can really focus on the defense for this year at least. So moving on to the Devils, they're another team that I think should be looking into defense, and I think Brandt Clarke is the right guy for them. I think Clarke and Smith can play well together. I think if you watch my last video, you know that I see Brandt Clarke as a very similar player to Drew Doughty, and if he can really turn out that way for the Devils, then their young core coming up in the next few years could very much resemble the core that we saw from the LA Kings about a decade ago. Obviously those Kings teams were very dominant. We could be seeing that as well with the Devils. Moving on to the 5th pick, Columbus. So Columbus, they haven't been, selecting this high since they were 3rd overall and they got Pierre-Luc Dubois. They had a couple of seasons where they were looking really good, making the playoffs. People had high hopes for them coming into the season, and then they flopped. I'm hoping for their sake that Patrick Laine will really find his game there. He's a player with a lot of potential, but he only really shows it every 5 or 6 or so games. So hopefully they can get some consistency out of him, and I would say the thing that they need to do the most is find him a center that can set him up. And as far as playmaking centers go in this draft, there's nobody more of a pure playmaker than Kent Johnson. Now, a lot of people think that Beniers is the better player. Some people even, I've seen some people thinking that Mason McTavish could go this high. I think that's a major reach. But I think Kent Johnson has the most offensive upside of any forward not named William Eklund in this draft. So, I think that's a really good pickup for them. He's a guy who in Junior A was able to put up over 100 points and was also very productive in his first year at Michigan last year. They have the option to send him back to Michigan again next season, which I think would be good for him. And then he can come in and be probably their second or first line center right away. Now, with Detroit, this is going to get a bit interesting because I'm going to do something very different from what I did in my previous mock draft, and I'm going to have them selecting the goaltender, Jesper Wallstedt. They have good prospects in every area, but you look at goaltending and you kind of wonder, they don't really have that starting goalie prospect in their system, and I'm sure somebody's going to tell me that they do, but I really don't believe that they do. They haven't used a high pick on a goalie in a very long time, and Jesper Wallstedt has the potential to be a great starter within 2 or 3 years, as long as you don't rush him. And I think that's kind of the missing puzzle piece for the future of the Detroit Red Wings right now. So moving on to the San Jose Sharks, I think they need to address the offensive side a little bit, and the fact that Dylan Gunther is still here is just absolutely unreal for them. So they're going to select him 7th overall. That's a steal. I mean, you look at the way that the board kind of has presented itself, you don't really, outside of Anaheim, I don't really see any of these picks being Dylan Gunther. Maybe Detroit if they decide that Jesper Wallstedt isn't their goalie that they want for the future. But definitely for San Jose, they're getting another forward prospect to fill a lot of holes in that offense for anyone not named Couture, Meyer, Hurdle, who might be leaving, and LeBanc, and Evander Kane, of course. But, outside of those guys, and not all those guys are going to be here 2-3 years from now, or they're not going to be at the level that they're playing right now. Dylan Gunther comes in. He's a lethal shot winger. He can beat you from a lot of areas on the ice. It reminds me a bit of Mike Hoffman in the way that he scores his goals because he's fast and he has a quick release. So overall, I think that's something that San Jose will really like having. Moving on to the LA Kings. Same pick, I believe, that I had them having in my last mock draft. Simon Edmondson is a pretty big defenseman. Overall, I would say defense is just the one thing that they need to address the most right now. They have really good center prospects between Byfield, Velarde, Turcotte, and Rasmus Kupari is also a center. So some of those guys are going to have to start learning to play the wing. But center is definitely the best position to have a surplus in. And then you add, a top pairing defenseman here at 8th overall in the draft. And he's somebody that can potentially play with Doughty before Doughty, inevitably starts to regress. And then you get Tobias Bjornfoot potentially as his partner, or you have a lot of possibilities. But I think Simon Edmondson overall, he has the capability to be that top defenseman that LA needs in the future. He's a big guy, heavy shot, hasn't been super productive offensively this season, but he has that puck moving part of his game to him, but he's a really good shutdown defenseman as well, and that's something that LA is going to really value from him. So looking at Vancouver at 9, looking at how the board has kind of fallen for them, it's kind of crazy that Matthew Beniers is still here. I'm thinking the chances of that probably aren't super high. Somebody in here is probably going to take him, or somebody's going to trade up to take him, because I don't really see him as a big fit in Buffalo, Anaheim, New Jersey, maybe Columbus. But, for most of these teams, I don't see him as a major fit. And Vancouver's another one of those teams I don't really see him as a big fit, because they still have Pettersson and Bo Horvat as one of the better center duos in the league. So sitting there and, not needing Matthew Beniers, one, I bet if they're in this situation, they trade back, because somebody's going to desperately want to trade up and get Matthew Beniers, like a Calgary or maybe Dallas. Looking down the list, Montreal even could be pretty interested in him. Assuming actually Montreal probably wouldn't be drafting there if they do beat Winnipeg in this series, but if they lose, that's where they'll be. So looking down the list a little bit, Fabian Lysell is an interesting option. Personally, I don't see him as a top 10 pick. Chaz Lucius can play the wing, even though he's listed as just a center here. So if I'm them in this situation, actually, and I'm looking at my options, I think I had Corson Coleman's as their pick last time. It's a bit early for that. I think for the sake of this mock draft, I'm going to have them getting Beniers, because I don't see him sliding out of the top 10. That just doesn't make sense to me. But if Vancouver does make this selection, then they have the option to potentially package him in a deal to get an elite defenseman in the league right now. Just send a couple of prospects, including him, and picks. Potentially get, like, off the top of my head, who's on the market. Seth. A lot of people are afraid of Seth Jones because he hasn't been super good the past 2 years, but he's a name that's come up a bit. You look, maybe LA does move on from Doughty, so potentially they can get themselves a Matt Beniers as part of that. Again, like I said, they have a lot of center depth, so they probably don't need that. Anyways, moving on, we're going to move to Ottawa here. And for Ottawa, I really like Cole Sillinger as their selection. He's a guy with really good playmaking abilities, north-south kind of center, provides a potential second-line center of the future behind Josh Norris, who I think at his very best, he's just a second-line center. But if you have two really good second-line centers, I mean, you can build a team off of that for sure. And looking at Ottawa's other prospects, they have so many forward and defense prospects that, like, if Wallstedt was here, I would probably justify them going with Jesper Wallstedt. I don't think that Detroit is going to pass up on him. So Cole Sillinger to me is just the best center option available for Ottawa there. So skipping the Coyotes, moving on to Chicago. So Chicago, they could potentially use another center if Taze is getting close to calling it a career. But personally, I think defense is where they're going to go here, and I like Carson Lambos. They have him a little bit lower on their board here, but I think there's no way he falls too far. He's a solid puck-moving defenseman, good defensive side to his game. Just provides a little bit more prospect depth at defense for right now. They have some pretty good offensive prospects, so I think this is something they can definitely afford to do for the time being. Moving on to Calgary, and lucky them, the same guy that I had them taking in my last mock draft falls to them once again. It's Chaz Lucius. So I see Chaz Lucius as kind of a similar player to Monahan, and I think that Monahan and Gaudreau are going to be guys that are kind of going to find their way out of Calgary this offseason. I think they're looking to kind of tear the team down and start again. And it's not the worst thing to put a similar style of player into the system that you were running, and just see if he can run it a little bit better. Honestly, that's the best thing I can say about that. Chaz Lucius, he has really good offensive upside. He was injured for part of this season, so he wasn't able to play the whole year. But when he did play, he did look impressive. Prior to this season, some people even had him going in their top 5, and then with the injury, he kind of fell on draft boards. But don't be surprised to see him kind of taken in the top 15 here. So moving on to the Philadelphia Flyers, that's a team that I still believe really needs to go defense, and there's one that I'm sure will be outside of the first round here on their rankings, but that I think would fit really well there. And it's the same guy that I believe I had them taking in my last mock draft. So let me just see if he is here. I can search, I guess. For Stanislav Svozil, I guess I missed him. Went 1 second. Just lost my page there. Going back there. All right. Stanislav Svozil. What happened there? Oh, I guess he got put in. All right, Stanislav Svozil. I think he's a really good defensive defenseman. I think he's got a lot of upside. He's been playing in the Czech Men's League for the past 2 seasons, I believe. It might just be the one, but I think he might have played last year as well. He's a guy with a lot of defensive responsibility that's been put on him the past few years, and he's really handled it well. He's a good physical defenseman. Maybe the offense isn't the thing you get from him the most, but you do have Ivan Provorov already, who's a pretty solid offensive option from the back end. Same with Travis Sanheim. So you're getting somebody who's a bit more defensively minded when you pick up Stanislav Svozil. I still think that this is where he should go. I don't think he will. I think that unless teams kind of value him the same way that I do, but I don't think from what I'm hearing right now that any of them really do. So he might be kind of a late first round pick, early second round pick in reality. But for me, out of all the defensemen available, this is the best fit, in my opinion, for the Philadelphia Flyers. So looking at the Dallas Stars for the next pick, I do like Fabian Lysell going here. He dropped a bit for me. Personally, I think that the year he had definitely dropped his stock. He wasn't as productive as I would have liked personally. But overall, he's a guy with talent. He's a solid playmaking player. And Dallas definitely needs to add on to their forward prospect pool. Once they lose guys like Jamie Benn, or once Jamie Benn regresses to too much that you can't really rely on him, and Pavelski's regression or retirement in the next couple of years, you're going to need to fill some holes. Personally, at center, I think they're pretty good right now with Sagan as the first line center, and I think Jason Robertson will probably be able to slot in at second line center. If not, they have a few other options. So definitely going after the best winger available is in their best interest, I think. So looking at the Rangers, it's hard to pick for them because they have a lot of really good prospects. They kind of get to go best player available, and to me, that is Sasha Pastujov. So Pastujov has been really productive for the U.S. development program this season. I believe he led them in points in both that and when they played in the USHL. And, you kind of look at some of the past guys that have led those teams in points, and they've been pretty successful in the league. Overall, I think he's going to be just another nice piece for the Rangers to add. You could look at defense for them. Obviously, you saw Adam Fox last year emerge as one of the best defensemen in the NHL, and they've got other young defensemen like Ryan Lindgren, and really, I think they can address defense in free agency if they need to, if they see that there's any sort of holes there. And obviously we know their goaltending situation should be pretty solid for the future right now. So, you get the opportunity to kind of just pick the best available player, and I think that was Sasha Pastujov. So looking at the Canadians, I've pretty much always had them taking centers, but watching them in the playoffs this year, I've kind of realized that Nick Suzuki is a legit number one center. He is fantastic at shutting down other teams' number one centers, and then he is able to provide his own offense at the same time. So that might not be their biggest need. To me, I've also really liked the way their defense is trending. That being said, you'll have to fill Weber's spot in the lineup eventually, but I think they get to have the option of going with a winger here, and so just looking through some of their options on the wing, seeing who's here. I like Alexander Kisakov there. So he's a guy that not a lot of people are talking about for the first round, but he led the MHL in scoring for all players under 18, and he's just an offensive threat, obviously, and to me he reminds me a lot of Nikita Kucherov. He's kind of on the shorter side, but just a dynamic offensive winger. And if Montreal can get a player like that in their lineup, it could really change the course of their franchise. And, at this point in the draft, I don't think there's anybody with as high of a ceiling as Kisakov. In fact, if you look at a lot of the guys above him, outside of the top 5, I don't think there's anyone in this draft with a higher potential than Alexander Kisakov. But there is that, risk of taking a Russian forward who may not be interested in coming over. But personally, I think that there's no way that Kisakov doesn't reach his potential, and I think that Montreal will get an absolute steal here out of him. So looking at the St. Louis Blues, last time I kind of had them reaching on a defenseman. This time they're kind of getting a steal here, and they're getting Corson Coleman's. I really like Corson Coleman's. He's a really good puck mover. He's gotten to develop his game in Junior A in Alberta, and he's going to be going on to the NCAA next year, where he'll probably develop more of a defensive game, but he's a really good two-way defenseman, and I think for the Blues, kind of fills some holes for the future for them. They don't really have any really highly rated prospects at the moment, as they've been drafting kind of late in the first round in recent years. So this is kind of an opportunity to add a new top prospect to your prospect pool. Looking at the Jets now. The Jets are another team that I believe should look at defense. Obviously, we've seen their defense look really solid this season, and they've been able to shut down in round one. They were easily able to shut down McDavid and Draisaitl. A lot of that has to do with the way that Hellebuyck played in that series, which was fantastic. But the defense should be should get some credit for that as well. That being said, there are some non-permanent kind of guys in that defense right now, and if you want to replace them, Danil Chayka is a really good pick for them here. So Danil Chayka, Russian defenseman, played for Guelph not this past year, but the year before when the OHL was running their season, and he was really solid there. He was really good defensively, and he had offensive capabilities as well, playing the point on the power play and such, having a really heavy slap shot, and being a good physical player. So overall, I think that Daniil Chayka would be a really good pick for them here. Prior to this season, some people had him as a potential top 10 pick. Then he goes to Russia, where he doesn't really get a lot of ice time in the KHL, but he does get some experience there. Overall, I think that the development for Chayka is going to be really important to see, how he ends up. But I do think that if the Jets take him here, they should be really happy about that. Now, looking at the Nashville Predators, once again, they should be really happy that a certain player fell to them, and that's Aatu Räty. So, with a lot of these players at this point, and I honestly could have had him taken earlier, but nobody had the hype surrounding them coming into this year prior to this season beginning than Aatu Räty. So he'd been playing in the Finnish league, for since he was, I think, 16 or 17, and he was pretty productive at that time. But this past season, he kind of lost that productivity. Wasn't as impressive. But to me, the way I see Räty, I think he's a guy with a moderate ceiling, not super high, but a guy who you're going to get in the NHL sooner rather than later, and he's going to be a really solid second or third line contributor, probably a penalty killer, guy who can score, the important goals for you, maybe not a lot of goals, maybe not get a lot of points. I think his range is going to be somewhere between the 50 to 60 points maximum kind of in his career for each season, I should say, not total. But yeah, I think that everyone needs a guy like that in their organization, and to get him in the first round, you're not wasting a pick because you're getting a guy that you know for sure is not going to be a bust. You're getting a guy who, for where he's being taken, he's a really solid selection. So moving on to Edmonton, in the last mock draft I had, they got really lucky, and Jesper Wallstedt fell all the way to their pick. That's not going to happen this time. So, do you look at the other goalie? Well, personally, I'm a big fan of Sebastian Cossa. I think he has a lot of potential to be a starter. This might be a little early to take him. If I were them, I might trade back to try and get him. But if a trade's not in the cards and goalie is really the position that you want to address if you're the Edmonton Oilers, then look no further than Cossa. He's a fantastic prospect. He's big, moves well in his net, and he's been putting up really good numbers in Edmonton in the WHL. So look for him to potentially be a late first round pick, because I do think that he's got that upside, and you don't see two goalies getting taken in the first round very often, but I think this could be the year that we see that happen. So looking at the Devils, who got this pick in the Palmieri deal, Palmieri and Zajac deal, I should say. So what do they do here? Personally, it's just time for them to add depth, because they're really adding a lot of prospects in different areas right now. Last year they had 2 or 3 first-round picks, I think 3, and they got Holtz, Mercer, and Mohamedoulan, so 2 forwards and a defenseman. So they can definitely look at another forward here. Chibrikov is interesting. As far as Russian forwards go, though, I think he's a bit riskier than some of the other ones we have here. Looking at Mason McTavish, he's a potential guy that could go here, but I don't think they need to address center. Looking at some of the other guys, I think that Oscar Olausson might be their best option here. He could be a guy who could really develop some chemistry alongside Alexander Holtz, but I do think at the very minimum he's going to be a solid third-line offensive player. And so and when you're building a full team of prospects right now, like the Devils are doing, having those kind of role guys is very important. So looking at Boston next, who actually has a first-round pick this year, which I feel like doesn't happen very often. looking at what they kind of need to address, I think center is something they need to look at, considering that they might be losing David Krejci this year in free agency. They could look at wingers as well, but I think if you look at Mason McTavish as a potential Krejci replacement of the future, that could be pretty nice for them. He's a good goal-scoring center, not much of a passer. Personally, not a guy I'm a big fan of because I've seen him going as high as the top 10, and I think that's a bit rich for him, but I think he could be a really good second or third line center in the future, and he scores goals, and that's the most important skill that a player can have. So Mason McTavish to the Boston Bruins. Yeah, I like that. All right, another pick for the Red Wings. I think they can take a risk on a guy like Nikita Chibrikov. They're a team that, they have some solid prospects in there, so they can take a risk on a guy who has boom or bust potential here, because if he really does boom, he's another top 6 forward that they can really utilize well. Moving right along to Columbus, we'll have them selecting, so they went forward with their first pick, and with the pick they got in the Foligno trade, I think they should go defense. So we could look at Scott Morrow. I think I'm going to slip him out of my first round for this one, because I do like, where is he? Sean Barains. Yes. Sean Barains in my last one, I had him going to the Jets. I think in this, and my bad, that's not the one they got for the Foligno trade. This is the one they got for the David Savard trade. So that's a guy that they need to replace, and they're going to be losing Seth Jones, so they need to add defensive prospects, which I'll probably have them selecting another defenseman with the 27th pick here. But yeah, so that's how I see them kind of selecting. Sean Barains is a mostly defensively minded two-way defenseman, but he's been solid on power play situations as well for the U.S. development team this past season. So looking at the Minnesota Wild, they could definitely add another center on to this team. If you watched some of my other videos, you know that I have predicted Jack Eichel being traded to them this year, this offseason. So that will definitely help out with some of the questions they have at center. Eriksson Ek has showed that he's a really good two-way center, but the offense isn't always really there for him. So if you want to just make sure that you're not going to be having those problems at center, you can get yourself a guy like Zach Leroux. Zach Leroux is a good offensive contributor for the Moncton Wildcats. Just another solid prospect to get here at the tail end of a first round. So looking at the 27th pick, which again is the Columbus Blue Jackets, we're going to look at defense again. Maybe I will have them selecting Scott Morrow here, actually. I think this would be a decent landing spot for him. Looking at some of the other options, though, I think I had them taking Anton Olsen last time, but I think the option of getting a right-handed defenseman here in Scott Morrow is really solid. He has really good offensive upside, could potentially be a power play guy in the future. So, I like that pick for them. And Barains and Morrow, I believe, are opposite hands, so they could be a pairing at some point. Looking at Colorado, well, Colorado, they're the luckiest team on this list because they don't need anything. They need depth. That's about it. So they get to pick the best player available. Personally, the guy I see as the best fit for them is probably Xavier Bourgault. He's a guy with good two-way capabilities, but he's good offensively. Could slot in as a really good third-line center for them behind McKinnon and Kadri. Moving on to Minnesota in the pick they got from Pittsburgh. I believe this was for the Zucker trade, but I could be wrong. Taking a look at some of the options here for their second pick, I think they're going to want to look into potentially a defenseman here because I think there's a few guys like Dumba who have their futures kind of in question there. So if you want to look at a right-handed defenseman, there's not really great options as far as first-round caliber goes. I might go down the list to see if somebody kind of stands out to me here that I've been kind of watching, but personally, I'm not sure that there's any right-handed defensemen here that I would take at this point. So for them, I like the pick of Fyodor Svechkov. I think that he's a guy who can provide solid depth for them on offense. So that's who I'll have them select in here. Moving on to Florida. In the last video, I wrongly stated that they didn't really have the second-line center prospect of the future. That is obviously Anton Lundell, who they had just selected last season. So thank you to the commenter that pointed that out to me. That being said, center's not really a bad thing to take at this point, but I think you can kind of go with a guy who can play anywhere, and that's Samu Tuomaala. I think that he provides a lot of versatility for the Panthers as a guy who can probably play on the penalty kill, power play if they need him. Can play anywhere from the second, third, fourth line down, basically. Probably doesn't have that first line potential in his future, but nonetheless, I think he's a guy that they would love to add. Thinking about kind of the prospect they lost in Emil Heineman in the Sam Bennett trade, I think he's kind of the similar kind of player that they gave up there, so they can kind of replace him right away. So moving on to the Carolina Hurricanes. They're another team that I don't really think have a lot of holes to fill, but I think Brennan Othman's a good pick for them here. They can kind of solidify some of the wingers there, which is probably the one spot that they could address, because honestly they don't need to address their defense. Their goaltending from Nedeljkovic has been really good, and there's not really a goalie here that I would take. And down the middle, they're really solid. So Brennan Othman's a good offensive player. I liked what I saw from him when he was in Flint, and he was pretty successful playing in Switzerland this past season. So moving on to the last pick of our mock draft, which belongs to the Vegas Golden Knights. And for them, I will have them selecting Prokhor Poltavov. I think that they kind of need to add some wingers in there. He's a solid offensive contributor. He had a lot of success in the NHL this past season. So overall, I think that he's a good, solid 30-second pick where they can kind of just go out and try and get the best offensive guy left on the board. So looking at my top 10 here, we'll just go over it again. That's William Eklund to Buffalo, Owen Power to Seattle, Luke Hughes to Anaheim, Brant Clark to New Jersey, the Columbus Blue Jackets selecting Kent Johnson, Jesper Wallstedt, the first goalie off the board, going to Detroit, Dylan Gunther, the goal-scoring winger, going to San Jose, Simon Edvinsson to LA, Matthew Beniers falling all the way to 9th and to Vancouver, who will probably turn into a trade piece for them or allow them to potentially trade one of the other centers that they have currently, and Cole Sillinger going to Ottawa. So I'll just quickly go through some of the other players that I have selected here, just slowly so you can all see them. And let me know what you guys think of my updated mock draft. Do you guys think it's better than my last one, or do you think that I'm absolutely crazy for saying that William Eklund would get drafted over Owen Power? I know I'm probably wrong about that. I'm pretty sure I am, but I do think that in the long run, people are going to say, why didn't we draft William Eklund first overall? I think he really does have the potential to be the best player from this draft. So if you did like this video, make sure you give it a like, comment down below, start a discussion, and please subscribe if you would like more content like this in the future.